Alrighty, so the title of my talk today is Priming the Pump, the Law of Circulation. So, you hear me talk about the law of circulation a little bit before we do the offering every Sunday, right? And so it's that thing that I always say about the hand that you stretch out in your giving becomes the hand with which you receive. In New Thought, of which we are a part, you hear a lot about laws. You hear the law of attraction, the law of reciprocity, the law of cause and effect, the law of mental equivalence, the law of circulation. They're all the same thing. These are not all separate laws. They're all referring to the same principle, and that is that there is something that flows, and to the extent that we participate in it, life is moving through us, as us, and with us. So I'm going to give you a really simple definition of the law of circulation. All things are flowing in a cycle and are ever expanding. All things are flowing in a cycle and ever expanding. Now, this idea of the law of circulation, or the universal habit of circulation, it applies to everything. The way I'm going to talk about it today is money. And there's a reason that I'm going to do this. We are a positive, practical spirituality. And one thing about spirituality is, like, we can get all up in our heads, we can get real airy-fairy fluffy about it, but never actually get real practical. But when we're talking about money, it is a practical, measurable, tangible manifestation. And so it's also the manifestation that makes everybody squirm for a lot of reasons. Because we get scared about money, because the preacher's talking about money in church. And I think we're afraid to look head on at it. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's talk about the law of circulation itself. Because remember, the talk title is also Priming the Pump, which is our part in participating in that. But we want to start out with just a very simple thing about this law of circulation. And I think everybody, for the last 10 years when I was learning about the law, there was a lot of belaboring about the point, but I don't think we need to belabor the point. I think everybody gets it, right? Right. So, but what I do want to do is take a look at something that becomes really, that makes it really clear. So to do that, I got a couple of slides, so I'm going to ask Garris to bring up the first slide. This is the Sea of Galilee, right? The Sea of Galilee has been feeding people on her banks, the fish in her waters, for thousands and thousands of years. There's life there, is there not? I mean, people are fishing it, there's houses built around the edges of it, and it's alive. So life is moving through the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is fed by the River Jordan, and then the River Jordan flows out its southern end. It flows a couple of 100 miles south into, we bring up the second slide, into the Dead Sea. Now, same part of the world, same soil, same everything essentially. In fact, you can see the sameness in the hills behind it. But look what's happening here. There's nothing built around the shores. No fish can survive in there. The thing about the Dead Sea is it has a salinity that's so high that nothing can survive in it. No fish, nothing but like some bacteria basically. And that's in a good year. Do you know why it looks like this? There's no outflow, right? So the River Jordan flows into the Dead Sea, but it has no outflow, and therefore no life. Because nothing can move through there. So all of the salt that gets washed in from the soil to the north of there pools in the Dead Sea. Is that pretty clear? I mean, it's I think it's really stark when we look at it this way, and it becomes really, really obvious. But then there's the part where you can go ahead and, then there's the part where we actually have to practice it, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So our part in participating in this law of circulation is what I would call priming the pump. Now, priming, if you look at priming a pump in the dictionary, it used to be that it would actually tell you what the process for doing something to a pump so that it would operate is, but we have so acculturated the phrase priming the pump that it actually gives you this definition. To supply with an essential prerequisite for activity. To supply with an essential prerequisite for activity. Okay, so that, okay, so here's the news. The news is that the essential prerequisite starts with you. Right? What I don't mean to say is that the law of circulation is not operating unless you prime it. What I mean is you're not participating in it unless you prime it. Right? Because it's operating all the time. It's operating in the Sea of Galilee and then operating in reverse in the Dead Sea. But in your life and in the experience and what you see in the world, in the good that you want to claim for yourself, the prerequisite for activity starts with you. And remember, when we talk about activity, we're not talking necessarily about the doingness. We're talking about the place from which we do the doingness. Okay, so I'm going to give you Chris Terry's 3-step method for priming the pump. Step 1, commit to it, right? So this idea is that we want to experience more good. And it might be money, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, but it might be more friendship, it might be more time, it might be romance, it could be anything. But it's something where we want more life to flow through and as us. Okay, so to commit to it means that you have to decide in what form you want to experience more life. Make a decision. Do you want to experience more money, more time, more love? Whatever it is, you have to decide, because the point at which you decide is the point from which, it becomes the seed out of which you're stepping into this flow happens. So I was looking up the definition of the word commit, and it means, actually it comes from a word that is committere, which means to give with or give together. And so what struck me as interesting about that is the minute you commit, life commits. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would come his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So when you commit, something happens, and that actually came from a book called The Scottish Himalayan Adventure. I love how he says, all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would come his way. Because the truth of the matter is that we have to, when we commit, we have to let go of the expectation that we're going to understand how our good is going to show up or what exactly the whole process is going to look like. There's this great example of this. So you ever looked up a word in the dictionary because you didn't know the meaning of it, you've never really seen it before, and you look it up, and then for the next 10 days you read something and the word is there over, and you're like, where the hell did this word come from? I'd never seen it before. I looked it up and now it's everywhere. well, what is that? Was the word there before and we just didn't see it? Like we've been skipping over that word, not really understanding what we were reading for the last 22 years? Or is it now just appearing in our reality? Like, I don't know this freaks me out, y'all. I do not know the answer to that question. But somehow, when I commit to looking it up, it then shows up everywhere in my experience. And it is the weirdest thing. But it's a really concrete example, right? Okay, so commit, number one. Number two, practice. I said earlier that New Thought is always a positive, practical spirituality, and you've heard me say a dozen times before, the spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it, right? So never, ever, ever take my word or anybody else's word for anything. Try it. Practice it. Discover it for yourself. Now, I will tell you that when you make this commitment and you decide you're going to practice this law of circulation thing by priming the pump or doing your part in it, I wish somebody would have explained this to me. They didn't, but I'm gonna clue y'all in because I'm nicer than they were. Maybe, I don't know. Have you ever had the experience of when you start to claim something or affirm something that's exact opposite shows up?
Yep.
Yeah.
Man, it's a weird universe we live in, right? So oftentimes when we speak something, it shines a light into the dark corners of places. And all of the places that we hold within us that prevent us from experiencing that. And it's loud up in here today. Yeah, the preacher's kid is the loudest. Okay, so all of the things, claim it for yourself. Micah, Kyle, Graphio.
Cue baby.
She's moving around. All the places that you don't know that become very, very visible. It's like shining a light. Like, whoo, there that is. So when that happens, if that happens, when you commit to practice, don't be fooled. It doesn't mean it's not working. It's simply pointing you to the places that you need to put your attention on so that you can dissolve them or get rid of them so you can step more fully into this flow. Does that make sense? Okay. You'll thank me later for warning you about it. Step 3. Expect your good. So I've seen people do this thing where they're like, so when we're talking about money, and we often talk about it in spiritual community, there's an old word that's thrown around, the word is tithe, right? Tithe means tenth, and it has been the practice in community for as long as I've known, that you give 10% to where you're spiritually fed. Now, in the old way of thinking, you give because God expects you to give. Well, I got news for you. God doesn't expect that of you. God has no expectation of that. You give out of fullness, and you give because you're spiritually fed or energized by something. So you're giving to a point of energy. Does that make sense? Okay. So I've seen people decide, okay, I really want more money, and so I'm going to try this tithing thing. And they sit down all grumpy and pissed off, and they write a check for 10% of whatever came in that month, and then the next month they're stamping their foot going, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Okay, that's not how we do it. The part that's essential here is the expectation part, right? So expect comes from the word expectere, which means actually from our vision. From our vision. So there's something about the place and the attitude and the intention and the attention that we cultivate as we give that makes all the difference in the world. The Bible talks about baking a bitter bread. Are you guys familiar with that phrase? Okay, baking a bitter bread is that other thing about like that. But expectancy means to see from. So when you sit down and intentionally participate what you want to cultivate is the vision of what it is you're doing. So you are seeing that you are giving life to life, from life, and that life is returning to you. That makes sense? I'm asking that a lot today, aren't I? Makes sense? Okay. So, Marcel Proust said the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in seeing with new eyes. You know, I don't know if that word really does start to appear on the page or if it was there all along and I just didn't know it. But there's something about cultivating this place of expecting and seeing with new eyes that allows things to move in a way that they couldn't move before. I'm going to tell you like a really poignant story of this for me. Probably like the biggest aha lesson I've ever had around it. So, was it 2008 that the market crashed? Okay, well, in our household, we depend on income that is directly tied to oil prices, stock performance, that kind of stuff. And also, my beloved is a massage therapist, and massage is oftentimes the first thing to go when people's income levels change, right? So, at the end of 2008, when the market fell apart, our household income went down by 60% in a month. And I was scared. I had just started ministerial school. I only worked part-time. I had a lot of extra bills because I was paying for school out of pocket. And I really wrestled with how am I going to figure this out? How am I going to figure out how to make this work? And I put pen or pencil to paper, and I worked it, and there was no work in it. Not only could I not afford to pay for school, I didn't know how we were going to live month to month until things started to correct themselves. That's very frightening. And but you know, I had been in spiritual community for 5 years, and I had been tithing for 5 years. So in other words, the practice then and my practice, our household practice still, is that we give 10%. And so I called my mentor and I said, Kathy, I don't know how I can do this. I don't know how I can do this. And she said, well, you can't. You can't do this. She said, now, are you giving? Are you participating in giving? And I said, yes. And she said, are you up to date? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then you have a right to expect to be supported. And I felt so much better, and then I got off the phone and all the worrying started again. You know, it's like when you hear a great idea and you're so convinced of it, and then you get stuck between your ears and you're all like, well, that's what she said, but whatever. What she doesn't know is, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this, right? And so I went back to fretting and worrying and all that stuff, and I called one of my prayer partners, and we had lunch, and I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to have to, probably drop out of school at least. And so he talked to me and tried to get me back to remembering the truth. That I didn't have to understand how this was going to work out, that I had to believe, I had to have faith, I had to expect that it would work out. And then we prayed. And I actually wanted to talk to him about how can I make this work, because he's real good with numbers. But what ended up happening is we just prayed together. And we got all done and finished lunch, and he said, well, we never did talk about the numbers. What's the number that we need to have show up? And I said, well, $6,000 over the next 2 months. And he whips out his checkbook, and he writes me a check for $6,000, and he hands me the check, and he says, here, this is a gift, not a loan, pay it forward. And our bills were paid, and school was paid for, and I didn't expect it in a million years. Not that way. I couldn't expect it anyway. You know what I mean? I could not make it up. And yet what I expected at some level was that I was stepping into the flow of life. And that because I had stretched out my hand with practice, with intention, with regularity in giving, that I would be supported by life. And it happened. So, commit, practice, expect. It would be really cool if it was like a really simple 3-step method and you did each step once and then you had it. But the truth of the matter is you practice over and over with whatever it is, money, friends, love. The other part is that, this whole circulation thing, there's a flow to it, isn't there? It's actually, it's not quite so discrete, the steps. There's a lot more movement involved. So, I thought I'd close with, how many of you have read Illusions? You haven't read this book. This is like an old, feel-good hippie, well, okay, it says hippie, metaphysical classic. So, the subtitle of the book is The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Okay, so it's really about an auto mechanic that hails from the hills of Indiana. And his life really works and he radiates this sort of wholeness. And so everybody starts coming to him for counsel and he gets sick of it. And finally he's like, screw it, go be your own Messiah. But he writes the Messiah's Handbook. And so I thought that I would just read you part of that handbook. A millman spoke and said, "Easy words for you, master, for you are guided as we are not, and need not toil as we toil. A man has to work for a living in this world." The master answered and said, across the rocks. Yet in time, as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. And the creatures downstream, to whom he was a stranger, cried, "See, a miracle! A creature like ourselves, yet he flies. See the Messiah, come to save us all." And the one carried in the current said, "I am no more Messiah than you. The river delights to lift us free, if only we dare let go. Our true work is this voyage, this adventure." So the thing here is you've got to try something new. And in that trying, in that letting go, in that making a commitment to give to something, somewhere in your life, it gives God the wiggle room to open your life up, to expand your horizons, to bring something new, and to bring more of what's good. Because remember, the law of circulation says that it's flow and expansion. And so that's why every week we say for the offering, heaped up, pressed down, and running over. I don't know how it works exactly. We call it a law, and yet there's mystery to it. But what I know is if you practice it, if you let loose in one place somewhere, it will open you up. It will open your life up. It will allow the divine to move in a way that you can expect but not imagine. Let's pray. So we're reminded that life is happening, and we know it in those sneezes and squeals and footsteps of those children running all over the place. They are life, big and bold, and reminding us that life is all around us. When we have eyes to see, ears to hear, we know it. And all of this life, everything that we see, know, touch, taste, smell, it all originates from this one source, the source that we call God. And that in fact, God is living its life. God is growing up and showing up in time as each one of us here, seeking to experience more of itself. And so what I claim right here, right now, is that each one of us steps by degrees of faith into a bigger life, into a bigger, bolder expression. For what I know is that there is more than enough. More than enough money, more than enough love, more than enough joy, more than enough peace. And we see it in our lives. We see it outpictured as our lives. The minute we commit to it, the minute we commit to seeing it. Monumental task. We have only a small part in it. So right here, right now, let each of us commit to doing our part, doing it faithfully. When we see the results of that, today, tomorrow, next week, or a year from now, let those results strengthen our faith that God is real, that life is moving in a real way through us and as us, and into our experience. And then let it become a way of life for us. So I bless it knowing that it's true already. And I expect to see it in the experience of each person here. And I rejoice in that. We call it good and very good. And we allow it to be what it is, as it is. And so it is.
So it is.